Hello, 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 and welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. I am joined by the radical, amazing superstar, Amy Hollenkamp, R to the D, to the
Hello?
stars.
To
And
the
today,
stars.
today, I know, I kind of like that for you. And today, we are talking all about prebiotics, baby. Let's get this show on the road. This is something we both agreed before we started today, that this is a underutilized tool for most people with IBS and SIBO. I think a lot of people are actually quite fearful of the thought of adding in prebiotics, but there are a lot of different ones available, and I think that some of those might actually be very useful for our audience. So, Amy, you want to lead us off with what is a prebiotic and what's the difference between a prebiotic and a probiotic? That's probably the best place to start us off.
Right. And I think you're right with prebiotics. There's almost instant fear when I bring it up with certain people. Like, you can see the fear on their face. Right. It's like, wait, you want me to try a prebiotic? Like, are you sure? Like, it's this sort of like fear because there's so much fear around it. But a prebiotic is anything that feeds your good microbes, whereas the probiotics are your actual good microbes.
Yep.
So you want good microbes in your system, and you can take good microbes like probiotic supplements, and prebiotics can be in supplements, but they're also in a lot of different plant foods. So any like fibers or different compounds within foods that are going to increase the growth of microbes is a prebiotic.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to frame it, because prebiotics you can almost think synonymously with fiber to a large degree, and they're soluble and insoluble. But we could probably also talk a bit about prebiotic-like substances that will feed or encourage the growth of good bacteria, but it's not a fiber. So like the polyphenol episode would be a really good example of that. Like all of those foods with polyphenols, like coffee and chocolate and berries, they feed the bacteria maybe because of some prebiotic in it, like some fiber in the case of the berries.
Right.
But also it's those compounds that give antioxidant qualities and color to the food. They have prebiotic-like action and can feed and nurture the good microbes as well, in addition to fiber, which is more what we're thinking about when we think about prebiotics.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I think, it's interesting in the operating mostly in the IBS and SIBO space, like fiber's scary, especially when you're given a low FODMAP diet, which is basically removing a lot of the prebiotic fibers from your diet, which then usually reduces gas production, which then sometimes can help with the bloating. Like there can be a benefit and a time and place to go low FODMAP. So I don't want to totally demonize it. But then once you've planted that seed, the idea of like fiber feeds SIBO or fiber feeds IBS really gets ingrained. And it almost takes restructuring how you're mentally approaching fibers and prebiotics to be able to add them into your diet again. But yeah, I find that a lot of times people restrict fibers and prebiotics for so long that then they start to lose tolerance to different food-related prebiotics and supplemental prebiotics. And it can be I still think it can be a valuable process of adding them back in, and they can still be really valuable, but it can be more of a systemic process of or systematic, sorry, not systemic, a systematic process of adding them back in. And you might need to get over some mental and physical hurdles in that process. I don't know if you experience similar with your clients, Nikki.
Yes, very much so. I think particularly the folks who have been on a restricted diet for a very long time, like more than a couple months, there's going to be a lot of kind of mental, like PTSD, honestly.
Right.
And again, I think it's totally normal and natural that if you notice a pattern of, I eat garlic and then I get bloated, and then I cut out garlic and I'm not bloated, and then I eat onion and I feel bloated, and I cut out onion and I feel better. Like, your body and your brain are smart enough to pick up those patterns and internalize it as some sort of a threat. So I think it's normal to a certain degree. And also, Lord knows, there's a lot of clinicians, especially in the functional space, who teach their patients that, again, the fiber feeds the SIBO and the FODMAPs feed the SIBO. And that also will make you quite fearful of food and fiber. But it is a necessary part of the human existence and a necessary part of a healthy microbiome, because that's going to be the fuel source for these microbes. And yeah, it's not a good strategy to cut it out long term. It's just a matter of how you get those foods back in. But yeah, I think there's significant mental hurdles and like food fear to really work through. And for some people, you need to work that through with a therapist or somebody like, you know, who has some training in the psychotherapy or therapy realm. For some people, you can work through that in conjunction with working with somebody like you or I. Like, we are not, neither of us is a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist, but we have enough firsthand and clinical experience that we can talk to you about those food fears and help you untangle that to a certain degree. It's a lot to cope with, especially if you've been on one of these diets for a very long time.
Right. Well, and I think you're right on with, like, there are definitely some individuals that need help from a psychological end of things that are a little outside of our scope. And, you know, usually in those cases, it's like if the fears are preventing optimal nutrition, like, definitely, like, even overall calories and that sort of stuff, because there's been situations where I've had clients where the food fears is literally preventing them from getting enough nutrition. Yeah. Then, like, having some outside help can be really valuable. But yeah, I mean, I think you're dead on with saying that it's totally normal and it's not something you should beat yourself up about, that you're, like, having these food fears. It's a very natural thing to recognize, oh, if I eat this food, I don't feel good. And I think the mindset then becomes, like, either, like, I have to starve the SIBO, or just, like, I have to control the symptoms with food instead of looking deeper. And I think, again, that pattern starts to get a little out of control at times, or just extended for too long of a period of time. Like, there was value at the beginning to maybe cut some of these foods for a short period of time. So I think that that's right on. And I do like, when I work with people, whenever we're trying to expand away from low FODMAP or broaden the diet up, I always go over, like, what that will look like and what's normal. Like, understanding what's normal with adding prebiotics in, I think, can be really helpful. Because I think it's okay to have a little bit of extra gas or a little bit of bloating or the adjustment. I know we've talked about it in the last another episode. Like, we don't love, like, referring to them as, like, symptoms, but more of, like, an adjustment or transitional phase.
Yeah, changes maybe.
Right, changes. Right. You'll notice some changes in your gut function, and that's totally natural. But I think what happens with prebiotics, especially, is people will either try more prebiotic foods or prebiotic supplements and, like, have a little bit of extra gas, or, you know, their bowel movement change a little bit, and then it's like, oh my gosh, like, this is not okay. I'm gonna go back to, like, where I was before. And it almost takes getting over that little transitional hump to where you'd actually see results. And it's interesting too, because in a lot of the prebiotic studies, they'll even talk about that hump. Like, they'll say, oh, the people in the study noticed, like, you know, the first, like, week or so of adding in, you know, 7 grams of FOS or something like that, that they had a little bit more symptoms or changes, however we want to phrase it, changes during that time. So it's something that's even spoken about in the research, that there can be, like, shifts and stuff that happen. But as your body's building tolerance and getting used to the prebiotics.
Yeah. Well, and I think I also want to make a point, because you came close to touching on something, and I want to point this out too.
Yeah.
this situation that so many people run into where they reintroduce a food or a fiber supplement and they get some symptoms or some changes, gas, bloating, poop changes, and they see that as a bad thing and they panic and they restrict back to where they were and they think, oh, that was a failed attempt, right? Like that reintroduction did not go well, so I'm going to leave it out. I've noticed too, this is again something that we can't blame conventional medicine for. We really have to look to integrative medicine to some degree, but also this was a big thing in my nutritional therapy teaching, the course that I took. I remember in that particular class, they were very big on this technique where it's trying to encourage the person, the client or the patient, to be more aware of their body, which is a good thing for the most part, right? Like there's a lot of people who are super unaware of their body and super unaware that like the McDonald's that they just ate is wrecking them inside and they're just like pushing through it.
Yeah.
So for the average American or the average person, this is probably great. But what they would do is they would have you have the patient or the person eat a food. And I don't remember it a lot because I didn't really resonate with this. I don't use it. But you would have the person take their pulse like before and after eating that food. And they said like if the pulse rate went up by some percentage, then that's indicative of a bad response to a food. And therefore that food should not be eaten. And it's kind of like a free DIY version of a food sensitivity or a food allergy test. And to be quite honest, I when I was going through that program, I was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to have people do that. I don't think that's going to be accurate.
Right.
I didn't use it because I don't think it's going to be accurate. But now I'm wrapping my head around, again, like for like the standard American person who's literally eating garbage, something akin to that could be useful to get them to tune in with, oh, wow, I've like been crazy lactose intolerant all my life and I never noticed.
Right.
And now that I have some more body awareness, now I'm realizing that and I'm picking up on the patterns. Versus, I think what's more typical is you and I don't work with a lot of people who are on a standard American diet anymore. Most of the people, or all of the people that we work with, have already been diagnosed with either IBS or SIBO, and they've tried a bunch of different dietary interventions and a bunch of different herbs, and now they're spinning their wheels and they're coming to work with us. But it's like, for that person who's already maybe hypervigilant and hyper aware of their symptoms, and they probably have a great deal of anxiety and stress related to those symptoms, and they're in this sucky mental place of like, my body is broken, my body hates me, my microbiome hates me, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Giving that person that frame of like, oh, take your pulse before and after you eat, it's like way too much. And then that person is going to, people in this space, I think, are going to tend to, pull back on the food and be like, oh my God, that was a failed, that I reacted to that food. Oh my God, I have to remove the food.
Right.
And I think that probably there needs to be more awareness on the clinician end and also the patient's end of like, would you assess yourself as more like hypervigilant, stressed and anxious and like having food fear? Because if that's the case, you might not want to hyper focus on your symptoms so much. Like body awareness is great for the average person who has zero body awareness. But for the people who listen to this podcast, it might actually be harming you because it's making you eliminate foods and eliminate things that you believe are triggers that might not actually be as big of a deal as you think they are. I don't know if I made that entirely sensible, but hopefully I got the point across.
I think you made it really sensible.
Thank you.
I feel like the way I look at it is we all tend to have a little bit of a negativity bias, and then
totally
you get sucked into like the mindset that food's the problem, or I need to constantly be monitoring my symptoms, like with this hypervigilance. And I feel like it's so easy to get really wrapped up in that or sucked down that rabbit hole of just kind of constantly monitoring your symptoms. And I think you know, there's a time and place to monitor a symptom. Yeah. But sometimes I'll talk to people and like, it's like they have like diaries from like 3 years of monitoring your symptoms. And I just don't know how valuable that is. Like, if anything, it could be harmful. So I try to help people focus on like if they're going to track anything at times, especially if I find that someone might be a little bit more hypervigilant, to focus on like what's going right today, like what foods are working for you, like what foods do you feel good eating, I think can be helpful. And then that like takes the focus off some of the negative sort of changes or symptoms that could be happening. And I think prebiotic wise, like having some expectations that there's going to be some shifts and an understanding of that. Now, if like, you know, symptoms, if it becomes really like painful or something like that, we don't want that either. But like usually there's a reasonable amount of shifting and changing that happens that's totally normal. And you wouldn't want to like stop doing it, stop kind of experimenting with adding different foods in or adding supplements in that are prebiotic based, just because you have a little bit of change happening. It can be a little bit of an interesting transition. And I think it's helpful to have a coach too, that you can bounce like, oh, I'm experiencing this. Is this normal? And like, usually I'm like, yeah, that's normal. Like I get emails like that. I get emails like that all the time. Like, oh, I had a little bit more gas and like my bowel movements look a little different. I'm like, that's totally normal. I had a little bit of extra like bloating the first couple days, and I'm like, well, it should go down. Like, you know, keep experimenting with it. Let me know if it doesn't. But I mean, I think that just expecting a little bit of transition and adjustment with adding in new foods that are prebiotic rich or new any supplements that are prebiotic rich, expect a little bit of change. Yeah,
I agree. And it's like, you know, I kind of picture your bacteria all waiting down in the colon, and then they've been eating the same 3 foods or whatever it might be for the last however long. And then all of a sudden you toss them a big old watermelon or whatever it might be. You know, you toss them something new and they're like, holy shit, pun intended. Whoa, look at this. This is amazing. And I picture this like feeding frenzy. You know, like all the bacteria are like, this is amazing. I haven't eaten this in so long. And it's going to be like a little bit squirrely in there for just a short period of time. And that's okay.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, like, looking at it in a fun way, like you're describing, I think helps. And, I mean, I will say, too, I feel like in the gut health space, there's so much focus on probiotics, and prebiotics don't get as much of the limelight, but, like, I've found them to be equally and sometimes more helpful, both dietarily, like adding in different fibers in, and supplementally than probiotics. And again, some people might be different. I don't want to like make huge claims, but like, you know what I mean? Like they can be a super valuable tool, and I feel like oftentimes they're like in the shadow of the probiotic, or like too scared to try it. Like maybe a probiotic they could wrap their head around, or overcome like the idea that probiotics feed SIBO, which is another falsehood. But maybe they can wrap their head about that, but not prebiotics. Like I feel like it's a bummer it's not discussed more or utilized more, I think, in the SIBO space. I find that the main time prebiotics are used, especially in SIBO, would be during treatment. Like I feel like a lot of people talk about, you know, partially hydrolyzed guar gum being used alongside rifaximin or antimicrobials through treatment. But it's weird. I find that like not many of the protocols, which I hate the word, but like not many of the protocols I see really talk about prebiotics thereafter. Like it's usually they're stopped after the clearing. But But yeah, it's a bummer to me that people don't explore prebiotics more.
Yeah. Well, or they view it through this limited lens of, oh, if I take PHGG, it'll help eradicate the SIBO. And it's still that like warfare mentality.
Right, right.
And that's actually, let's start out of the supplemental prebiotics. Let's start with PHGG because that is one that I think more people with SIBO are familiar with. And maybe they've taken it before. It's not FODMAPy. It's typically not gassy, but sometimes you will see shifts with it. Again, like I had one patient, I remember, she had the highest methane level on stool testing. So I should say the highest level of methanogen presence in her stool sample that I have ever seen. And it was insane, like off the charts.
Right.
So as an example, on a 16S stool test, like Thrive or Ubiome or, Biome Site, one of those, usually you would see methanogens making up less than 0.1% of the microbiome, right? Like very small fraction. This woman had 7%.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
How is her gut even moving?
It was not. That's the thing. She was pooping maybe once or twice a week. She was in rough shape. But one of the things for her, I got her started on PHGG because it has been shown to reduce methane. And I forget what else we did, but we got her to a point where she was pooping every day, to a point where she said, I'm actually getting sick of pooping. Like, this is kind of, like, it's a time commitment every day to, like, go to the bathroom and drop a poo. But nonetheless, she made a lot of progress. But I remember when she started PHGG, she was like, is it normal that my bowel movements reek to the high heavens now? Like she went from hardly any smell to profoundly poopy smelling poops. And I was like, well, that's probably a good thing. You're probably feeding your microbes and they're making stinky stuff for you. Like poop is supposed to smell, you guys. If your poop does not smell at all, that's kind of weird. So we thought it was a good thing. But yeah, I remember her talking about like, yeah, God, like my gas and my bowel movements really stink now. And I'm like, it's probably a good thing. And she was pooping better and her methanogen numbers came way down to where they should have been. And it was good stuff. But that was one good example of the changes that you could see. And it was with PHGG, funny enough.
Wow. It's so interesting. Yeah. I find that PHGG is usually pretty well tolerated. I mean, there's always, again, everyone's a little different. So, I mean, there's always, the minority that doesn't tolerate a supplement. That's just kind of, it is what it is. But I would say it's usually pretty well tolerated in the SIBO space. I find that it's a good starter prebiotic, especially if you're coming from a lower FODMAP diet. Or you're coming from a lower fiber standpoint, using it to kind of help bump up fiber and help with your body's increasing different microbes to help with its tolerance of, prebiotic foods that you're adding in too. But yeah, I really like guar gum and Sunfiber. Well, Sunfiber is the brand, but I really like PHGG. I find that it's pretty helpful.
Yeah. I will say though, I'll throw this out there. So I don't know if you knew this. I think maybe some vague awareness of this. So when I started my YouTube channel in, I think it was 2017, the very first series that I worked on was the series I called SIBO Mistakes. And it was all of the things that are holding you back if you feel like you're stuck with SIBO and it keeps coming back again and again. And I don't remember where in the progression it was. I think it might have been like number 6 or 7 or something. Partially hydrolyzed guar gum was one of my SIBO mistakes, but not for the reason that you think. That's the thing. And I keep thinking I need to make an update video on my opinion on PHGG. So my point in the SIBO mistake video was that I think it is lunacy that people would stay on a low FODMAP diet or a low fiber diet.
Okay. I know.
And then go ahead and spend money and purchase a fiber supplement to help with the eradication of the SIBO. My stance with that was, well, why don't you just cut the nonsense, enjoy your freaking food more, and don't waste money on a supplement that you don't need? Why don't you just introduce some more of those FODMAP foods when you're in the eradication phase? Like, it made no sense to me, and it still does not make sense.
Right.
Why you would cut down on fiber from food and make yourself miserable from a nutrition standpoint and make yourself less nourished from a nutrition standpoint. But then you're like, oh, but I can take this supplement and that's cool. And it'll increase the eradication. It's like, it's at least worth considering trying to add in some of the food-based prebiotics instead of just solely relying on PHGG.
Right.
So that was my original beef years ago with PHGG, and I still stand by that.
No, I stand by that too. Like, doing low FODMAP during treatment and then throwing in some guar gum for good measure instead of just eating fibers. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. Well, and then you have people too, sometimes, like, and I feel like it's less so in the integrative space, but I've also seen it in the integrative space too, where, like, they say, like, eat whatever you want. So, like, some people take that as, like, I'm gonna have, like, I don't know if you've seen this, I've seen it a couple times. Yeah, like, I'm gonna have, like, my biggest hurrah, and then I'm going low FODMAP immediately after.
Yeah.
And so they, like, totally probably eat, like, everything that they can cram in because they know they're gonna go on this restrictive diet after the fact. And so I'm sure, like, that's not great either, to just, like, load up on all the junk you could potentially eat in a 2-week span.
Yeah.
And then dive into low FODMAP.
Well, and do you know what that's setting the stage for? Binge eating and disordered eating.
Yeah.
Like, if you're having these periods where you're like, yeah, I'm going to eat pizza and Pringles and Pop-Tarts and I don't know, like, whatever. And then you're like, now, like a week or 2 later, you're like, I have to be super strict. Like, I'm just imagining it from the perspective, if you hang out with your friend or you hang out with, like, your mom one day and you're eating everything and anything, and then, like, 2 weeks later you get together with the same exact person and you're like, oh, I have to be super strict about my diet. It's like, that person is going to be deeply confused and worried about you because it makes no sense whatsoever. But yeah, I've seen that too, where people are like, oh, eat whatever you want during the kill phase, and then you have to do strict low FODMAP.
Right. And I think, again, like, probably being, like, on clearance and, like, eating wildly isn't gonna help you repair the microbiome. Like, it could hinder, I think, in some ways. So it's all wild. Sometimes I just shake my head, like, what are people telling? Like, it just doesn't make sense.
What are you people doing?
Yeah, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But
yeah, I do think PHGG is a very useful tool, but like I said, it's not the be-all, end-all. You can't have a sucky restricted diet and then be like, oh, I'll just take this.
Right.
And that goes for all of these supplements that we're going to talk about. Like, that's not how it works.
You're dead on. And I do think that sometimes, like, from what I've seen, certain prebiotic supplements can help the person, like, I feel like it's, like, a good intro into, like, oh, I can sort of, like, add this in, it's a lower FODMAP fiber, and then we can they can wrap their heads around that as you're working on adding foods in. So, like, I do think sometimes from a mental standpoint, people can accept, like, a lower FODMAP fiber supplement as being something that they're willing to get behind as we work on, like, adding stuff in. So I do think that, it can serve in that way, but you're totally right. The goal should always be to increase your diet and get prebiotics, different forms of prebiotics from foods.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see. Which one shall we talk about? I feel like we should start with the lower FODMAP, better tolerated, kind of like to keep up the pattern that we started with PHGG here. Another one that I sometimes will use, and it's not something that you're going to get through food, but I do sometimes use it and find it helpful. Do you ever use 2FL supplementation with your patients or your clients, rather?
I have not, but I'm curious.
Okay. Are you familiar with it at all?
Not really.
Okay.
Shoot, I'm curious.
It's 2FL is a human milk oligosaccharide that has been...
I think I know what you're talking about. Is this like Hologos?
Yeah, exactly. Hologos.
Okay. Yep.
Standard Process came out with a new one with that ingredient in it more recently. But yeah, it's these 2FL products, and what they are, I was kind of drooling over them a little bit for a while because they've had this available as a supplement in Europe for a number of years. And for some reason, we just didn't have it here in the States. The only product that we had for a long time was Metagenics, has some sort of like powder supplement. I forget. I think it was like a leaky gut healer upper or like a protein shake, and it had a little bit of 2FL in it. So sometimes I would use that, but we didn't have a separate supplement for that in the US until probably 2 or 3 years ago. And the idea is that it is a prebiotic specifically for bifidobacterium, which are oftentimes diminished by a low FODMAP diet, and they're usually low in most people to begin with, let alone doing low FODMAP.
They're low in people that have IBS.
Exactly.
Yep.
And this 2FL prebiotic that's found in human breast milk will feed the bifidobacterium, and it gives them kind of an anchor point to hold on to. So there's a genetic polymorphism or a SNP called FUT2, FUT2. And if you have these SNPs, you're said to be a non-secretor, which means that you don't put that little like anchor point out in the gut to hang on to your bifidobacterium as you would hope to do normally. So supposedly it can be really helpful for non-secretors in particular. I will say I have some of those non-secretor SNPs, and I've tinkered with taking 2FL, and I haven't noticed anything noteworthy from it.
Yeah.
But I'm also not terribly symptomatic these days. So, you know, like if I'm super stressed, I don't poop. But other than that, I really don't have any symptoms of IBS or SIBO anymore. So maybe I'm not a good judge of that. But yeah, if you have low bifidobacteria on stool testing, and you're wanting to do like lower FODMAP or less bloaty and bubbly kind of prebiotics, then that can be a useful product for you to look into.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've had a couple people take Hologos, and they've had good results with it. It's not something I've used extensively, but it seems like a really interesting product.
Yeah, I've used it moderately frequently at this point.
Cool.
So yeah, there's been a handful of people who are like, yeah, I didn't really notice much of anything from it, but quite a few people have, which is nice.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Yeah, and it comes in like little sachets, and yeah, it
I
doesn't have
I
much
like
of a
the
taste.
sachets. I don't think it's very environmentally friendly, but it's convenient.
It's not. Yeah,
it's convenient.
Agreed. Yeah, but yeah, so that's one to consider. I believe PHGG also raises bifidobacteria to some degree, and I believe it also raises lactobacilli, and some of the butyrate producers like Roseburia. So it's pretty useful. PHGG and 2FL, neither of those raise Akkermansia. So if you have low Akkermansia, then maybe not so much. I don't think either of them raise Faecalibacterium either. But yeah, they're both very useful supplements, especially if you're doing low FODMAP and your bifido are taking a hit because of that.
Right.
Both of those can feed your bifidobacteria to some degree.
Right. And you brought up Akkermansia. And have you ever done, I think we actually might have talked about this at one point, like you were experimenting with a polyphenol supplement.
Yeah.
I typically just tell people to start trying to eat more polyphenol rich foods to start.
Yeah.
But I know there's certain like polyphenol supplements that I've heard some other colleagues use from a prebiotic standpoint to raise Akkermansia. Is there any that you use or have used?
I haven't seen anything that's really compelling yet.
Right.
So Akkermansia seems to like, and we'll talk about this in our good gut bacteria episode coming up, but Akkermansia seems to like the FODMAPs. It seems to like tea polyphenols, black tea, white tea, green tea, oolong tea. It seems like it likes all the red foods like berries and pomegranates and cranberries and that sort of stuff. So the red polyphenols seem to really help it. I feel like I might have read something about grapeseed polyphenols raising it, and I do use grapeseed polyphenol supplementation moderately frequently. It also seems to raise Faecalibacterium and like the Clostridia species, the butyrate producers, a fair amount. So sometimes I use it for that.
Yeah, I like grapeseed as well.
Yeah. Not grapefruit seed.
Right? Oh my God. I was just going to say that. You literally read my mind.
No, totally different.
I always, yes, do not mix those up.
0 out of 10. Do not recommend grapefruit seed extract internally. Don't do that. But yeah, the grape seed. The other one that I have read a little bit about and supposedly will raise acromantia, but I have limited experience with is shoot. Hold on, I have to look up the name of this damn supplement because I have that little experience with it. Why can't I think of the name of it though? Darn it, Amy, why did you make me forget?
I'm sorry.
You should be. All right, hold on, guys. Moment of boringness. Luckily, I just ordered some so I could check in on the account that I ordered it from, but it is escaping me, and it's going to bug the crap out of me, pun intended.
Well, while you're looking at that...
And boring the crap out of our listeners.
What can I discuss? I went to the gym.
I'm so close, though.
Okay. I was going to talk about my gym experience today.
Okay, go for it. Have you found yourself an 80 or 90-something-year-old gym boyfriend yet?
No. There is a grumpy guy at my gym named Larry who I love. He's always complaining about the different exercises we do, which I do love. He's maybe 55 to 60.
Yeah.
So, but he's kind of
oh, Larry.
I probably won't be able to do the class that we're doing when I'm his age. So good
Fair.
For Larry, you know?
Yeah, go Larry. I found the name of the supplement, by the way. Can I get a drum roll, please? Thank you. Pycnogenol.
Oh, Pycnogenol? What a name.
Why that was escaping me, I don't know. But yeah, Pycnogenol is supposed to raise acromantia. I don't have, and this is in the prebiotic realm, right? Because it's not a fiber. Right. It's not a food for the bacteria, but it does seem to stimulate the growth. I have only limited experience using Pycnogenol. I just started kind of dabbling in it more recently, so I'll table that conversation for a few months until I have a little bit more data to understand that. But yeah, so those are some of the things. I think acromantia, primarily, you're going to raise that with food.
Yeah. I think so too. So eat all the berries and tea, drink all the teas.
Coffee if you're a coffee person.
Yeah. Every time I think of bitter stuff, I think of Thomas.
Yeah. Oh.
We need to get Thomas back on.
We do. He's a hoot. He's a good person to talk to. He's very knowledgeable. But yeah, I think of him often too. I told you, right, that I tried to drink coffee for a whole month and I was very proud. And eventually I just was like, yeah, it's not doing anything for me. It's it's warm dirt water. So I just cut it back out. But I did drink coffee for a whole month. So I'm going to tell him about that next time we have him on the pod.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you. You should be. I am too. How about, have you ever used glucomannan? Or do you use that very much? Or do you recommend that your clients eat miracle noodles, shirataki noodles?
I have not. Tell me about this.
Oh, are you not familiar with the miracle noodles?
No, I'm not familiar with the miracle noodles.
Oh, I think it's a Japanese thing, if I remember correctly. But yeah, there's these, if you just Google miracle noodles or shirataki noodles, it's basically these noodles that are made out of this prebiotic, glucomannan. I think it's cognac root, if I remember correctly. But it's basically all prebiotic and no carbs. Not that carbs are evil. We do not preach that on this podcast, damn it. But if you're looking to get a bit more fiber and you already get carbs from other sources and you think, well, what the heck, maybe I'll do a low carb, high fiber noodle, then shirataki noodles could be in the work for you. And you can also get this glucomannan prebiotic. You can also get that from, capsules or powder and take that. I don't use it a ton. It does seem like it raises lactobacilli.
Cool.
And it has some research for weight loss specifically and metabolic syndrome type stuff. I don't use it a ton, but it's usually reasonably well tolerated by a lot of people, especially if you start at a lower dose and you kind of gradually build up. But that's one that doesn't get a lot of airtime.
How does it
cred.
taste?
If the noodles or the prebiotic powder itself?
The noodles.
It's been a long time since I've tried them, so I don't remember. I think they have a neutral / nothingness taste to them, if I remember correctly, which is kind of okay because noodles, the whole point of a noodle is to take on the taste of the sauce that you're putting on it. So if you put like pesto or red sauce or something on it, then it might not matter much. Similarly, I don't think this would be a prebiotic, but when we lived in Arizona, we lived just like a mile down the road from a Korean supermarket. And then like another mile or two down the road, there was a gigantic Chinese supermarket. And I would go there and get fun stuff every now and then. And among them, I remember at the Korean supermarket, I would get seaweed noodles. And they came in like this little, pouch with some liquid in them. In the pouch. So you would open up the pouch, drain out the liquid, and then just warm up these noodles. But they were made from seaweed. So again, very low carb, paleo, AIP compliant, all of that jazz. This was back in the day when I was doing more of like, not strict paleo, but I was like 90% paleo.
Right.
But similarly, the kelp noodles or the seaweed noodles had virtually no taste on their own. So it just took on the taste of whatever sauce you put on them, which was actually kind of nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Look, I'm like the noodle queen right now. I'm the noodler. Actually, fun fact, did you know that noodling is a thing?
Yeah, you stick your hand in and then you pull out the fish, right?
The catfish, yeah. Never knew that noodling was a term in and of itself up until I heard Kathleen Madigan talking about that in one of her bits. So now I know. I have never noodled before, but...
There's some cool noodlers on TikTok.
You and your TikTok.
TikTok is great. You need to go.
No, I might. You know what? I've joked before. I think I'm like the old lady of Instagram in a way. I'm not hip with all the kids stuff and the ruckus that's on Instagram, but I'm trying and I'm making more of an effort recently to do reels. And I feel like reels are practically analogous to TikTok videos in a way. Like it's Instagram trying to be TikTok, let's face it.
Right.
So I was thinking recently, I was like, oh, maybe I need to start scrolling on TikTok a little bit to get some inspiration to make reels. But I'm really deeply concerned that I'm going to be sucked into the void of TikTok and I'm never going to reemerge. So
knowing your like addiction to social media, you would get sucked into TikTok. Mine's like all dog videos. Like it's funny the algorithm that comes. Mine's like all dog videos and like kid videos, like all cute stuff. And then Armand, my husband, like he has the weirdest algorithm. Like I don't laugh at any of his stuff. I'm like,
he's an odd dude though. Let's get real here.
Well, sometimes it's funny. Like we'll be in bed and he'll be like, "You want to watch TikTok?" And then we'll fight over whose phone. Because, like, whoever's algorithm it is, like, we're dying. Like, the one person's dying and the other one's like, this isn't good.
That's funny.
So,
yeah. Mike and I, we are more of a YouTube household, personally.
Yes.
Maybe that's why I got on YouTube a couple years ago, because that's, like, my platform of choice. But, yeah, Mike gives me anxiety, though, because his YouTube watch later list is literally, like, 600 things.
Oh, my God.
And I'm like... Like, you would never find a video again once you save it to your watch later list. What's the point? Me, I try to keep it at, like, 10 or 20 things that's, like, on my watch later list.
Right.
But, yeah, we're more of a YouTube household. But, yeah, we'll, like, watch a YouTube video or show somebody a video before bed. But then if I put it on his phone, he'll be like, oh, you're going to mess up my algorithm now. Because, yeah, we get totally different recommendations.
Right.
But anyway, that's not the point of this podcast. A little side note, nonetheless. But, somehow we got on the topic of TikTok. Anyway, back to prebiotics. Pick a prebiotic, my dear. I have one more that's non-fodmappy, so if we want to continue on the non-fodmappy road, we could do that.
Shoot.
Acacia Fiber.
Yeah.
Opinion, experience. I don't use it a ton, but sometimes I do, and it's usually pretty well tolerated.
Yeah, it's not something I use a lot either, but I have before. I do think it tends to be a well-tolerated soluble fiber. I never know how to pronounce it, so I'm glad you said it.
I think it's Acacia.
I think
People
I think
correct me
you're
in the
right.
comments if I'm wrong.
I think you're 100% on. That's kind of how I've said it or tried to say it. I always like second guess myself with that particular prebiotic.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good one. So like that's a good an easier tolerated prebiotic to try.
Yeah. It's also very cheap. Like,
yeah.
I think Now Foods makes a tub of it that's like 1 pound, and it's like $20 or something.
Yeah,
that's like, it's pretty reasonably priced.
Yeah, that's something I always kind of consider with some of the prebiotics, because there's some like pretty like trying to be like fancy ones that I'm like
the combo ones.
Right. It's like on its own, like FOSS is like $8, but then you're mixing it with like you know what I mean? Like sometimes I'm like, really? Is this really like a $50?
PHGG is kind of expensive. That's one of my only beefs with it is like you look at it and the bottle of it
looks large,
$20 or $30. But the thing is, when you get up to the full dose of 10 grams, you know, you're doing 2 big scoops a day. Like I have people blowing through one of those canisters of PHGG every other week.
Right.
And it's like when you're spending $20 or $30 for a canister and you're going through it every, 10 to 14 days, like that adds up. So that's my one and only beef with PHGG is it is a little bit more expensive as opposed to, like Inulin, talk about FODMAPpiest of the FODMAPs.
Right.
This container, it's an 8-ounce container of powder, 1 ingredient, nothing weird in it, no fillers, no binders, no nothing. It actually says other ingredients, none. So there's nothing else in it, and it tastes amazing. And
cotton candy, remember? It tastes like cotton candy.
I tell patients that all the time now. And this 8-ounce container costs like $12,
right?
$10, something like that. Like very reasonably priced. Versus again PHGG, which is less financially doable for everybody.
Right. I agree. And I used to like Goss used to be cheap, like Bemuno sachets, because I used to be able to get it on Amazon, but I haven't. It hasn't been available anymore. I don't know.
More recently, right? Like the last 6 months or so, maybe.
Right. Maybe it's like a supply chain thing. I don't know what's going on, but
issue.
Yeah,
I noticed that also because I was just doing Bimuno. So we'll go right into that. So let's talk about GOS, galacto-oligosaccharides. Yes, this is a FODMAP, but funny enough, this has pretty good research in IBS. Mm-hmm. So even though it is technically a FODMAP, the GOS column in the FODMAP acronym usually is reasonably well tolerated by people, I'm finding, especially the supplemental form. So I do use it fairly frequently, but I was getting it. Bimuno is one of the brand names, and that only has GOS in it. And then you could get it here in the States, but it's Galactomune from Claire Labs, and that has a little bit of another prebiotic in it. I forget off the top of my head which it is.
I think it's beta-glucans.
Okay, yeah. Which is also well tolerated and benign enough, but
right.
So I use that quite a bit, and I do really like GOS. I use it quite a lot in my hydrogen sulfide cases. I've used it with my methane people before. Just general IBS when, we're looking for other prebiotics to work in. Sometimes we'll just do it for the sake of IBS. But GOS is pretty good stuff.
Yeah. I really like GOS. I was kind of bummed that it's like not as much on Amazon anymore. You can still order it. But I really like GOS. It might be, if I had to choose a favorite of the supplements, it might be my favorite.
Oh.
When I learned about Bemuno?
When?
When I had my FMT.
Ah.
So when I had my FMT, they used Bemuno at the clinic.
Gotcha.
So they have you take Bemuno every morning while you're doing the FMT to try to kind of feed the bugs that they're putting in.
Yeah. And inhibit some of the bad guys, too.
Which was interesting because at that time, I was still a little, freaked out of prebiotics.
Yeah.
I had never tried them before. So I was like, whoa, this is interesting. But, I understood I needed to feed stuff, during that time. So I took it and I did fine with them. Like I had no issue
Nice.
with taking the GOS.
It's oftentimes very well tolerated. Again, despite being a FODMAP, which might turn some people off to it. But yeah, I use it to inhibit bad guys, whether it be the hydrogen sulfide producers, or I believe it inhibits proteobacteria as well. And then it certainly feeds bifidobacteria, and I think it also feeds Akkermansia and Faecalibacterium. Because again, it seems like Akkermansia likes a lot of the FODMAPs, and Faecalibacterium sure as heck loves FODMAPs. Because it's a butyrate producer. All the butyrate producers really like FODMAPs. So yeah, I even had one. Hold on, let me just share. Let me find it. Remember this one patient more recently, like within the last handful of months. Let's see. So we layered in GOS, the Claire Labs one, and she had a pretty noteworthy response. Let me find the chart note really quick. So this particular patient has a lot of histamine-related symptoms. She even described herself on her intake questionnaire. She described herself as hyperallergic, allergic to everything, kind of a person. Stress is definitely a driver for her symptoms. We figured that out now. But she also has a lot of neuropathy and, tingling or pain in her feet in particular. And when she started Galactomune, she said that within an hour, her feet were totally calm and the neuropathy subsided. And she was the biggest raving fan. I don't know why. If I remember correctly, without looking at her lab test results, I do think she had high hydrogen sulfide producers. And supposedly neuropathy and numbness and tingling in the extremities can be a symptom of hydrogen sulfide overproduction. But yeah, it was really wild that within an hour of taking her first dose, the symptom in her feet was pretty much gone. She was like, whoa, that's cray.
Right. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
That's wild. Yeah, I think typically I've seen GOS be well tolerated. Again, there's going to be people that react to it. But typically it's one of my favorites. Yeah, but I always think back to my FMT days, taking it, mixing it in, being a little I don't know, down the hatch.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny too, because do you mix the FOS or if you took GOS in anything? I just kind of shoot it in my mouth and take a swig of water.
I don't know if I've taken GOS particularly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've taken it personally.
It tastes like FOS. It tastes like cotton candy, so you might like it.
I'd probably love it. I should go pull one off the shelf right now. I've got Galactomune on my shelf right this minute.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, shall we talk about my favorite?
Is Inulin your favorite?
It is. Yeah, it is. Which is so ironic because I work with so many people who are on a low FODMAP diet and they would die if they knew that. But
right. Yeah.
Again, it's
Is that your
cheap.
Baby?
It's cheap.
Yeah.
It's delicious. It's effective. And I have had some patients who either work this in as a supplement or you could get it in chicory root. So if you get there's a drink called Dandy Blend that's basically roasted dandelion root and roasted chicory root in a powder. And it's kind of like an instant coffee type of beverage, like a coffee replacement beverage.
Yeah.
I've had patients either who start supplementing with Inulin or using Dandy Blend, and then they said that their bloating and their IBS got remarkably better. So.
Right. Yeah. It's just so interesting. This whole, it's funny in the research having, just totally different ideas on how to go about IBS, or especially IBS too. There's a lot of people in research around IBS and low FODMAP, which is cutting out every fiber. And then there's also some really interesting studies on IBS and prebiotics being helpful. So it's just funny, the dichotomy of different ideas on how to go about dealing with it. But I do think, I've talked about in the past, there was that research where they got rid of, or they had people do like a low FODMAP diet for a period of time, and they had another group do prebiotic supplementation for a period of time, and both had a reduction in symptoms. But the low FODMAP group, their symptom reduction just lasted for when they were on low FODMAP. When they started eating normally again, their symptoms came back. But the people that did the intervention with the prebiotics had more sustained relief. I don't remember how long they followed them, but it is interesting. I think, again, like they also noted an increase in hydrogen sulfide producer during that test, just like how there is evidence both ways, but I think it seems like low FODMAP's more of the short-term solution and has a time and place, and prebiotics could potentially start repairing some of the microbial, or be a part of the microbial repair that's going to help build resilience to your gut more long-term.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think FOS is an interesting one. Definitely one that's scary. Like, I think of the scary ones.
This is like ultra FODMAP right here.
Right. But I tolerate FOS fine, too. There's some people that tolerate it just fine, even in the SIBO space, which kind of is interesting. But
the key, I think, is to start slowly.
Right.
Like, if now I'll dig into this and get a big heaping spoonful and just go to town on it. And that's totally fine. But the first couple times you take it, you maybe want to take like 1/8 of a teaspoon.
Right.
And then work your way up to 1/4, then 1/2, then a teaspoon. Then you can work your way up to the heaping tablespoon that I usually do. But like, if you go right into that dose, guns a-blazing, you're going to hate our guts.
Right.
And like write angry comments on this podcast. So don't do that. But yeah, it's really wonderful for, again, feeding bifidobacteria, feeding the butyrate producers, inhibiting bad bacteria like proteobacteria, because when you feed the butyrate producers with something like Inulin, they make short-chain fatty acids for you, and as the name implies, they are acidic, and they change the pH of the colon to be more acidic. They lower the pH, and then that low pH inhibits the growth of bad guys. So actually, you want to know what my absolute favorite application for Inulin is?
Is it? And I'm good.
When people are freaking out about estrogen dominance and they see high beta-glucuronidase on a stool test, and they think, oh, I need to take calcium D-glucarate and and I need to do this and detox my estrogen. And I'm like, no. If you have high beta-glucuronidase on a stool test, like a GI map, for example, you need to acidify the colon.
Yeah.
You need to modify the pH so that the bad hombres like E. coli don't get a chance to make that product. Because beta-glucuronidase is made by bacteria, particularly gram-negative proteobacteria like E. coli, and you can inhibit their activity and inhibit their growth if you modify the pH.
Yeah.
Colon, which is what Inulin is fantastic at.
Yes.
The money shot. And also, don't waste your money on calcium D-glucarate. I don't think it does anything.
You heard it here, folks.
It's a Band-Aid.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's so interesting to, and we haven't mentioned it, that, I do think that prebiotics can be prokinetic, like because they raise levels of bugs that stimulate the MMC. I think that that's an important point too. I think there's so much like focus in the SIBO space on, activating the MMC or making sure that the MMC is working properly. And I do think like, things like bifidobacteria and lactobacillus seem to stimulate the MMC. Things like E. coli, which you just mentioned, could slow it down a bit. So, you have to be feeding these good bugs to have a healthy, functional MMC. And just keeping that in mind, I think, is important too, as to why you don't want to starve these things out and you need prebiotics, because you got to keep these bugs strong so you can have better MMC function.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's actually a really great point, because I do think a lot of people, especially with SIBO, feel very doomed. Like, I'm going to have SIBO forever. Oh my God, my body's broken. My microbes are broken. Oh my God. And, I've been doing some webinars this week, and I've been talking with a lot of people and doing a Q&A, and there's a definite, distinct tone of doom and desperation and, oh my God, what am I going to do? And, I think, like, and there's somebody I've been talking with on Instagram this week who's like, I've tried everything. I don't know what to do, and I don't know what my root cause is. And I wonder about stuff like this. Like, well, maybe your motility isn't intrinsically broken. Like, maybe you don't have, like a severed vagus nerve, like some people seem to think. Maybe it's that you don't have enough good bacteria to stimulate the MMC, and you actually need to focus on feeding and nourishing your body and your microbiota, as opposed to what most people seem to do, which is restrict.
Right.
Tough.
Yeah, it's a bummer. But yeah, I mean, I think the more we can try to change the landscape a little bit in terms of what people are focusing on, at least to the capacity that we can. But I think changing the mindset, there's always this mindset of, you have to heal your gut, you got to like almost restrict, like go on this hyper restrictive diet. Sometimes it's more like AIP like, where they're eliminating allergens. Sometimes it's more low FODMAP, but like if you have a leaky gut, you have to follow this diet and it repairs your gut. But I mean, a truly resilient gut is going to be tolerating a lot of these different prebiotic fibers, and you're going to have to build up different prebiotics to build resiliency in your gut. And I don't think that's even a discussion by most practitioners, that like a resilient gut is one that tolerates prebiotics, and that I would say that you can build up tolerance to different foods and things like that. That makes your gut more resilient, doesn't like you don't have to restrict these foods to truly repair your gut. You actually have to eat them to build resilience. Yeah. And I just wish more people were talking about that. I do think it's shifting a little bit. Like, I do think that I'm seeing people being more aware of like some of the setback, like some of the downsides of restriction, but there's still so much room to bridge, like a gap to bridge in terms of what people are focusing on at this point of time.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like one good example, I do think the tides are starting to turn. Right. And I judge that in part because I love the guy, but I'm going to call him out a little bit. I learned a lot of my kind of patterns of cutting out all the foods, looking for the bad food sensitivity that was plaguing me. And like, I learned some of that like food fear-ish behavior and like clinical process from Datis Karazian's coursework back in the day. And his courses are fantastic. He's fantastic. I don't mean that negatively, but when I was learning from him initially in, around 2010, 11, 12, that kind of range, the dialogue in his classes was very much, you need to do Cyrex food sensitivity testing on everybody. They need to cut those foods out. Maybe they need to do AIP or the so-called Repairvite diet, which is basically AIP. And you need to restrict and then clean up the gut that way. And now, to his credit, in the last 2 years or so, he's been doing his own courses. It's called the Karazian Institute. But as he's been doing those Karazian Institute classes, one of his first courses about 2 years ago was on the gut. And he's now advocating that, you need to build tolerance and have diversity to promote tolerance. Right. And therefore, he's advocating that everybody should be doing what he calls the, I think he calls it like a vegetable mashup.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a smoothie, but it's not as tasty as a smoothie. But he says, you should be taking like 30 different plants, putting it in a Vitamix, blending the crap out of it, and drinking a glass of that every single day to promote diversity. And I was so happy to hear that in that class that he did a couple years ago, because I was like, okay, Tatis, you're coming full circle. Way to go, bro. So, I do think the tides are slowly starting to turn, and I'm glad that somebody with his clout and his following is going to start putting that bug in practitioners' ears, because I think a lot of this is coming from the functional and integrative space, honestly.
Right.
But yeah, you need to, if you want your gut to tolerate stuff, you have to give it something to tolerate.
Right. Exactly.
Kind of the name of the game. So I do think, I agree. It's, again, we should almost, like, as clinicians and practitioners, we should almost have like two different sets of systems for our patients. Like, on the one hand, we can work with people who are on like a standard American diet, and they're eating, they're eating Chick-fil-A and Twinkies and God knows what, and soda. And they have some blatant food issues that they're not addressing. And it's like, those people probably do need a little bit more like tough love, maybe like having some come to Jesus moments to get them to realize that, like, no, you are severely lactose intolerant.
Right.
And you cannot eat dairy. End of story. Well, what if I just have pizza? No. There's those people. But the vast majority of the SIBO and IBS space are already hypervigilant, and they're already restricting so much, and it doesn't serve them well to put them further down that rabbit hole. So it's like, we almost need to make that initial assessment and then work with people a bit differently, depending on what situation they're in. But we're getting there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I do think, I've had maybe like, I could count on my hand the number of clients I've had that are in that side where it's like more standard American. And they've come maybe from more of a conventional setting. But like sometimes I'd almost I don't want to say prefer, but like haven't gone down a rabbit hole so much to where they're like very depleted. But, I think that the more we can promote balance in the space, the better.
Yeah. Balance
in like, making sure you're nourished. Like, if anything's to the extreme that you're not nourished, that's not going to be a good thing. And I also think even like balanced in what you're restricting, because like what we've talked about so much is, and even with prebiotics, like you could bring this into the mix. Like there's probably some FODMAPs that you could tolerate. And then there might be some that you don't in this moment. Maybe you can build tolerance to them. But I think a lot of times we're either all or nothing. There's like no in the middle, and we're so in the middle. I mean, I think as practitioners, we're more in the middle. So we get caught there and we're like, what's going on? Like on both sides. But I think that the more that you can hone in on what's working for you and what's not, and avoiding unnecessary restriction, the better your microbiome's going to fare. And, the more prebiotic foods you're going to be able to incorporate into your diet.
Yeah, no, I agree. And to keep the car rolling on the prebiotics, by the way, because we're not done, people. We're not done.
Yes.
Another FODMAPy but very useful supplement is XOS. So we talked about FOS, like inulin, GOS, like galactomune, and now there is another OS supplement, XOS, and you can get that as a powder, or I think I told you not that long ago on a podcast that Jarrow makes a chewable tablet that's GOS and XOS put together.
Yep.
That's actually quite nice tasting. But that's another good one that I use. Again, if you're on low FODMAP, then you probably don't want to get right into XOS because it is very FODMAPy. But it's wonderful for feeding bifidobacteria.
Yeah.
That's where it really, really shines. It probably feeds other stuff too, like Akkermansia and Faecalibacterium, because they seem to like FODMAPs as well. But the research so far supports it use in feeding bifidobacteria.
Yeah.
So that's a consideration.
And I like that too. Like, Jarrow has some good, like, they have a FOS too. And, like, I know some of the prebiotic blends are, like, FOS, GOS, and XOS that I've seen.
Yeah.
And, like, you could just do a Jarrow, like, one of the FOS and one of those chewy ones, and it'd be, like, $20 versus, like, some of the fancier ones are, like, 50.
Microbiome Labs.
Right.
Sorry, frog in my throat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
and side note, the product that I think you're alluding to from Microbiome Labs with FOS, GOS, and XOS in it, I cannot tolerate that because it is so sweet and so, like, artificial tasting. Like, they put some weird flavoring in it. I forget if it's, like, tropical or peach or something, but if anybody from Microbiome Labs is listening right now, please, for the love of God, find a better flavor for that product.
I thought that they changed it. Like, they got a whole bunch of complaints. I think that it was too sweet.
I'm not alone!
I do think that they changed it.
Oh, okay.
You know.
I thought it was like $50. Like,
right.
Nobody got time for that.
Right. And I, like, you told me about that XOS and GOS. And I was, like, looking at, I'm like, well, these are cheap. I've actually used it. They're, it's funny because, like, I had a client that was out of country, and like that was like one of the brands that was available. I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like, and I was like, oh my gosh, these are pretty inexpensive. Like, you could just blend the two together and it would be like way cheaper of a mix.
Jarrow is a good brand. Like, I like a lot of their stuff actually.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I use quite a lot of their probiotics, some of their prebiotics. They have a good sulforaphane supplement that I use called Brocomax. I like that brand quite a lot, actually.
Cool.
Solid. Let's see. I feel like I'm running out of ideas now. Surely there are more that we're forgetting. Oh, what about, do you use like psyllium husk or bran or some of the, like Metamucil? Any of those kind of standard products that you would hear more about in a conventional GI setting?
Not really. I mean, I've had some people that have come to me and say they like they felt really good on psyllium husk, or like they felt really good on one of those, and then I'm just like, well, keep taking it if you're feeling pretty good. We might switch up in the future, but it's not typically ones that I lean on. What about you?
Likewise, I don't use it a lot. I know, psyllium husk to some degree can feed the butyrate producers. So, maybe I don't think I've ever seen it evaluated as far as like Faecalibacterium specifically or Bifido, but like some of the lesser known butyrate producers like Roseburia,
right?
I think it might feed those guys, and it can help with constipation and fluffing up the poops a bit, but it's just a little bit of a hard sell because it like turns into such a gummy, goopy.
Well, you sent me that video.
Mess.
Remember when you sent me that video of that guy that ate like, I don't know, like 200 servings of it or something like that?
Yeah, so for those of you who are out of the loop, I don't even know if I can find it anymore. So what was it? Months ago, I had texted Amy, and I was like, you've got to watch this. So my husband follows this guy on YouTube. I don't care for his videos typically because this is how the videos are. He's very popular. He has millions of subscribers. He's a medical doctor, and he does these like case reviews of sorts. But his voice is just like over the top dramatic, so I can't stomach him for more than one video at a time. But he'll be like, a man ate 200 servings, or a man ate 3 bottles of psyllium husk, and this is what happened to his liver. Dun, dun, dun. And like for the entire 15-minute video, he'll be like, and then JC went to the ER and they told him he has fatty liver. And then this, and it's like all way too dramatic and I can't handle it. But that video was very interesting because somebody took, I don't even know, but it was like 200 servings of psyllium because they thought that they needed to clean their colon.
Right.
And they were like, yeah, the more the merrier. And they got to a point where they put so much psyllium, it was thick. It was like one giant chunk. And the guy was eating it by the spoon.
Well, and then he was putting it on bread. He was like making like a peanut butter and jelly or something out of it. It was gross.
Yeah. And long story short, way too much psyllium husk, plus not enough water to go along with all of that psyllium husk.
Right.
The guy ended up getting a blockage in, I think, his colon.
Yeah.
Because he literally made a giant plug in his gut and it stopped him up. But this was from an exceedingly large couple of days worth of doses of psyllium husk, and it was a super bad idea. So yeah, I don't recommend taking that amount of psyllium. You definitely need to make sure that you pair that with a ton of water. Same thing goes for slippery elm. If you ever use slippery elm for like GERD or gastritis or leaky gut, you ideally want to mix it with water and then chase it with even more water because it absorbs a lot of water and it can become quite thick.
Yeah.
But yeah, otherwise I don't use psyllium a ton. I find also a lot of people have already tried psyllium, like especially if they're constipated. So it's like I'm not telling them anything new if I recommend psyllium.
Well, it's kind of interesting too, like of all the prebiotics, it seems like doctors use like psyllium, metamucil, like they use like the very basic of the basic. Like you would think that they would experiment a little bit more. But I don't know.
Got nothing.
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, the only other two that I could think of, and they're not technically FODMAPs, but I will let you choose the next path. I think that we should give a little bit of airtime to resistant starch. Mm-hmm. And then I think we should wrap up and just give a little bit of an honorable mention to lactulose, because lactulose is a prebiotic in its own right. I don't think it's technically a fiber, but it is a prebiotic, and a pretty marvelous one at that. So maybe let's start with resistant starch. Can you give me the registered dietitian crash course on what the heck is a resistant starch?
Yeah, so resistant starch is sort of like it sounds. It's resistant to digestion. So we're not going to digest it and break it down for nutrients. The gut bugs are going to break it down and metabolize it. And it's found in foods like potatoes, sweet potatoes, like starchy type foods are going to be higher in beans, legumes, plantains, rice. It's found in a lot of those types of foods. And I will say resistant starch, there was a big thing going around like maybe like 5 years ago, like when I was going through my gut stuff, where people are taking like raw potato starch as a prebiotic, which I've come to find out, I never did it, but I think it gets metabolized differently when it's raw versus cooked.
I believe I've heard before, I think from like Jason Hawrelak's stuff, the probiotic advisor guy, I think he's said before that raw potato starch is about 70% resistant starch and 30% starch, if I remember correctly.
Right. Well, I think that Lucy Mailing, I'll have to pull up Lucy Mailing, said that like you don't want to necessarily take like tons of resistant starch from raw potato. I'll have to pull it up, but I think it's structured differently than like if you cook and cool it or so
well, and you get into like if you're eating spoonfuls of raw potato starch, you're now using it as a supplement.
Right.
Which isn't bad. We've talked about a bunch of supplements today, but it is like a little bit of a different thing, as opposed to if you cook and cool the potatoes or the rice or the beans or the legumes, then you're going to get that naturally through your food. So like a cold potato salad, or my husband would die, but like cooked and cooled rice. That is a hard no for my husband, by the way.
Really?
He's very fussy about certain things. And he will not eat cold rice because of the resistant starch, because you know how it like, oh, you disappeared for just a flash.
You did too, but you're back.
Weird. if you've ever eaten cold rice, it is kind of off-putting because it's like crunchy and not a super nice texture, you know? So Mike is like, absolutely not going to do it. I, on the other hand, love sushi. So I'm like, bring it. I'm good.
Right. Right. Am I frozen?
No. Am I?
No, but I'm frozen I'm frozen in my video. I'm like in a very unappealing like facial expression. But
yeah, you're fine.
What I've heard too, and again, I would probably need to go and look at different sources, is that like cooking and cooling, even if you cooked it again, like maybe not super hot, it would still be more resistant starch than if I have heard that too. So like if you really hate cooked and then cooled and like eating cold rice or something, even if you heated it up a little bit, maybe not like piping hot, it would still retain more resistant starch than like your first go round.
I think that's the key. Yeah, you just don't want it like piping hot. And I do that. Another good source is overnight oats or soaked oats. So most frequently if I do oatmeal, which I go through phases where I would say probably 5 days a week I eat eggs for breakfast. Mm-hmm. And then the other couple days a week I may be doing like sausage or bacon, or like every now and then my husband makes pancakes, or I'll do, overnight oats or something. But what I'll usually do is I'll soak the oatmeal in like almond milk overnight. And then in the morning, I don't like to eat cold oatmeal. So I'll just like give it a stir, transfer some into a smaller bowl for that morning. And then I just microwave it for like 30 seconds just to bring it up to not a cold temperature. And then I mix in, I like to do, here's my recipe. You ready for this? Overnight oats soaked in almond milk, primarily so I get some calcium because we talked about my issues with calcium. So I'll do that. And then I warm it up just a little tiny bit. And then I put in a teeny bit of honey, inulin, collagen peptides, cocoa powder, and natural peanut butter. Mix it all up. And
dang, you're getting all the prebiotics in that.
Chocolate and peanut butter and goodness. It's so good.
Resistant starch. You're getting polyphenols. You're getting inulin. Look at you go. Look at you go.
I know. And I've gotten my daughter to eat it too, but for some reason, you know what she wants to add in on top of everything I just said? Coconut flakes. Like, the shreds that are like this long.
Yeah.
We don't get the sweetened kind. So it's just plain coconut shreds, but I'm like, I don't know if I'm behind that. I mean, I'll eat her leftovers sometimes because #parent life. Half of our meals are leftovers anyway at this point because we're eating the food that she rejected. But, like the shredded coconut is an unnecessary addition in my opinion, but my soon-to-be 6-year-old thinks it's great that way.
Right.
So,
interesting. Mm-hmm. I used to eat coconut flakes like when I was on my very strict SIBO diet, so that's triggering me right now. I'm just kidding. But there's a juicery, and then they also do like smoothie bowls and smoothies, and I always get it on my way home from the gym. So like today, it's like a smoothie bowl, and then they put like granola, cocoa nibs, coconut, like little, like not the big flakes like what you're talking about, but like little like sprinkles almost.
Yeah, like little shreds.
And then a banana like line, and that's really good. I like the like little, like the texture of the little flakes versus the big flakes and something like that. Like anything that you're topping it.
I would get behind this flavor of oatmeal if not for the chocolate and peanut butter. Like if I just did like coconut and like banana and like nuts or something, like I would get totally behind a coconut flavor, or you could put like some coconut manna, like the blended coconut, you could put some of that in there. I'd get totally behind that. But it's just the combination of chocolate and peanut butter, which in my mind is pure and beautiful. It's like all of those peanut butter cups that I was robbed of in my youth, right? And then you add coconut, and it's like, why?
Right.
It's not that I don't like either of them, but by the way, so I was kind of doing this when you talked about your smoothie bowl. because you said cacao nibs, and it made me chuckle on the inside. So I have to share a story about my husband.
Okay.
So have I told you before what a sugar addict my Mike is?
Yes.
Dear God. So the boy is a sugar addict for sure, and I've teased about that for years and kind of trying to keep him healthy. So when I was in grad school, and he was in grad school, I went to school in California, he went to school in Arizona. So we were in a long distance relationship, and we would go visit each other, you know, like once a month or whatever it was. And I remember he came to visit and stayed, you know, for a weekend or a long weekend or whatever. And he confessed to this like 2 years later. He came to visit us when we lived in our apartment in Huntington. And like Mamie and I were in the living room or one of the bedrooms. I don't know. We were doing something. We were chatting. And Mike got up and went around the corner into the kitchen. And he was snooping through the shelves in the kitchen. And he stumbled on a bag of cacao nibs because that was at the height of my hippy dippy eating, and like everything was like organic and free range. Not that that's a bad thing. And also I was getting like weird shit from Whole Foods, you know, so I got cacao nibs. Well, he thought that they were chocolate chips. He did not know what cacao nibs were. So he found what he believed to be a bag of chocolate chips. And he said he took the biggest handful and shoved them in his mouth because he didn't want to get caught, because he's a sugar addict and he knew he would get in trouble. So he shoved this big handful of cacao nibs in his face and immediately regretted it because he realized he was like, oh, there's no sugar in this.
Oh God.
And then I don't know what he did. I don't know if he like spit them out or what he did, but he had to like figure out something. He didn't confess this to me until after we were married.
Oh my gosh.
He confessed this like 2 years after the fact. And I was like, oh my God, I would kill to go back in time and be a fly on the wall and watch you in the act. How precious is that? But yeah, Mr. Sugar Addict, thought that he was going to get away with that and he wasn't going to get caught. And then lo and behold, it bit him in the butt because he ate pure cacao nibs, which have no sweetness whatsoever. Ha!
Oh my God. Well, it's funny to me too, because I'm sure he was like, oh gosh, Nikki doesn't have anything good.
I know.
Nikki doesn't have anything good. And he finally like finds this rando thing of cacao nibs. Mm-hmm. He's like, oh, finally, like I found something that has a taste to it. And then like, you know, he throws it in his mouth and is disappointed.
Pure bitter.
Right.
Oh gosh. Yep. The infamous cacao nib story. I bring that up all the time now. I'm like, hey, remember when?
Yes. What year was that?
That would have probably been 2012.
Okay.
I graduated at the end of 2012. So yeah, it would have been 2012 because we lived in Huntington at the time.
Okay. So the cacao nib incident of 2012.
Of 2012, exactly. Yes. May it go down in history, the history books.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I wonder, another one, I don't have an example here, but have you ever tasted Schisandra berries?
I haven't, but I remember you talking about it for liver support in it's an adaptogenic herb or berry. So wonderful
herb. I believe the bark or the root might be as well, but typically what you find here in the States is going to be the berry. It's a very unique flavor profile. It's called the 5-flavor berry. Mm-hmm. So it's got bitter, salty, sweet, umami. I forget. It has all the flavors. And it's very like, oh. The whole experience of eating these. But you can get them as dried berries. And funny enough, a patient brought me a baggie of Schisandra berries, like dried ones. I forget why. He bought like a 2-pound bag. Are you playing with your microphone cord, by the way? I keep hearing like this echoey tinny noise. Yes, you were.
I was twirling it on my finger.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think it was like making a kind of metallic noise because of the microphone stand.
Right.
But anyway, so one of my favorite patients brought me this bag of Schisandra berries, and he was like, yeah, I bought too many of them. I'm not going to use these ever in a million years, so here, I'll give you some. And I was like, cool, thanks. And I put this little Ziploc bag of Schisandra berries, dried berries, on my desk, and I almost, for like a second and a half, I thought that they were mini chocolate chips for a quick second, and I almost went to get a pinch of them and eat them. But I very quickly realized that they were schizandra berries, and that would have been extremely shocking to find out that it was not what I thought it was.
Quite
kind of
traumatic.
Like my mic.
Yeah,
it would have been. Yeah, it's like, when you think that you're picking up a glass of milk and then it's like your friend's orange juice and you're like, oh God.
Right.
It would have been like that.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think the last hurrah I have, at least, as far as real bona fide prebiotics is concerned, is lactulose.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the thing, party people. Lactulose is a prescription in the United States. We can't have nice things in America, so, we all have to be punished for some reason. But it's over the counter in literally every other country. I think it's just us and Austria that make it a prescription for some god unknown reason. I think what I heard, confirm if you guys know the story, I believe the story is that because lactulose is a bit of a laxative at a high enough dose, I believe I read somewhere that people with like disordered eating were buying it and using it as a laxative so that they wouldn't absorb their food as much, and they were like pooping out their brains, but they could still eat what they wanted.
Yeah.
So I think that was the genesis of why it became a prescription product here in the United States. But it's preposterous because other than that very minor subset of people who were abusing it, it is extremely safe, extremely well tolerated, and a very talented molecule to deal with. But it inhibits proteobacteria, which I learned, I don't know if I told you this ever, but our last dog, Bonnie, we lost her a couple years ago to liver failure. She had very, 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 very high liver enzymes for a number of years. The vets couldn't figure out why. I had her on some supplements, and that, if that helped matters and prolonged how long we got to spend with her. But ultimately, she went into acute liver failure, and she had very high ammonia levels, and her liver wasn't able to process the ammonia anymore. So she was getting neurological issues from that, all very, very sudden, very quick. And one of the things that they did when we took her to NC State Veterinary Hospital, shout out to those amazing, amazing people over there, is they were administering lactulose orally and as a lactulose enema. And when I researched, I was like, I wonder why they would use that for liver failure. And I Googled it, and basically, ammonia is produced by some of the proteobacteria phylum, which across the board, pretty much all of them are bad hombres to some degree or another. And you can suppress proteobacteria growth and therefore suppress ammonia production, and therefore take away some of the burden on the liver, because the liver is what has to process ammonia. Otherwise, it becomes neurotoxic. So you can spare the liver and spare the nervous system that ammonia burden by inhibiting the ammonia producers, aka proteobacteria, and you can do that with lactulose. And I was like, that is so freaking cool. So I will sometimes have people go to their primary care and ask for a prescription for lactulose. It's very cheap. It's well tolerated by most people. And it does seem to help not only with inhibiting those proteobacteria, but also it does seem to promote the growth of Akkermansia and Bifidobacterium, and to some extent lactobacilli. But I think the place where it really shines is inhibiting the bad guys and feeding Bifidobacteria. So it's really cool stuff. It's just, we can't get it over the counter here.
Yeah.
America. Somebody, one of the listeners in another country, ship me a truckload of lactulose. And
we're going to be like the
dealers.
The lactulose dealers.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, I will say I have seen numerous patients get a prescription for lactulose from their primary care. Again, it's very safe. So especially if you have symptoms of constipation, then that's great. But I've actually I've written a note to their doctor, and I'll attach the chart notes from our appointment, and I'll attach lab test results, and I'll basically write a little bit of a cover letter and send it as a fax to their doctor, and tell them the reasoning of hey, I'm working with so-and-so on such and such. Here's what came back in some stool testing. I would like to have them pursue using some lactulose. Would you please, talk to this patient about this? I think it could be helpful, but I'm unable to prescribe it myself. And then I'm finding that a lot of the times practitioners are willing to write the prescription for it if you can verify why you want it.
Right.
So yeah, very talented molecule. I really wish it was over the counter here, but yeah, America.
No, we just have
Maybe we should
PPIs
start a
over the
petition.
counter.
I know. Okay.
Oh no, did I get you
Speaking
into...
of which.
Okay.
Yes.
We've struck a nerve.
Well, yes. So last week, my husband was having some symptoms. So abdominal discomfort and bloating, and it was affecting his breathing. It was kind of freaking him out because he was having a hard time breathing and shortness of breath. So I took him to urgent care, did a couple tests, kind of ruled out some stuff. And then we had an appointment on Monday of this week with a brand new primary care doctor. Fresh out of med school. She graduated med school in 2020. She's a resident. She was lovely, lovely, lovely woman. But I had to chuckle at how basic of a primary care experience this was. So, for example, he's trying to ask questions about like his current symptoms. She's like, well, I'll test your cholesterol and your A1C. And I was thinking, why? It's got nothing to do with what he's complaining about right now.
Right.
But luckily, I spared him the blood draw, and I was able to say, oh, actually, I ran a whole bunch of blood work on him in March. Here you go. Here's the results. And then she was like, oh, okay, cool. So she didn't need to do that. But yeah, she was like, I'll check your cholesterol, which is like the most stereotypical primary care doctor shtick, I think, ever. And she was like, yeah, for the symptoms you have right now, like you could try some Gas X. And, if that doesn't work, come back and we'll talk about getting you started on a PPI. And I just, on the outside, I had a mask on. And on the outside, I just was like a blank canvas. But on the inside, I was like, no!
Right.
No!
Right.
This willy-nilly prescribing of PPIs. And by the way, she asked him if he has any sort of heartburn or acid reflux. He said no. And then 5 milliseconds later, not really, like 5 minutes later, she goes, yeah, if the Gas X doesn't work for the bloating, come back and we'll get you started on a PPI. And I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna lose my shit.
Right.
That is not what they are indicated for. PPIs have a use, they have a time and place, but they are so overprescribed. And the fact that you don't seem to give a shit about the possibility of nutrient deficiencies or like anything that we've talked about on this podcast was just so frustrating. And then she said, oh, you could also try a probiotic. They don't have a lot of evidence, or they don't have a lot of like good quality research on them, but for the people they work for, they work really well. And I was just like,
right.
It's a good thing I was wearing a mask, because otherwise she would have seen like a face underneath.
Right.
But we got out of that appointment and I pretty much just looked my husband in the eye and was like, you are never taking a PPI. And the probiotic comment was so incorrect, and your cholesterol was fine. And she told him too that he was not insulin resistant, and I was like, okay,
Yeah.
because his A1C is good, and we could talk about blood sugar. We should probably do a whole episode on blood sugar, honestly, and the pros and cons of A1C. But like his A1C is good, but his fasting insulin is elevated, and his fasting glucose is borderline, and he's overweight, and he was just diagnosed with fatty liver disease.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, he's insulin resistant, woman. But yeah, his A1C is good, so he's fine. Yeah, he's fine. Don't worry about glucose. Just eat a Pop-Tart and live your life.
Right.
I don't know. I was just like, ugh. So yes, you struck a nerve.
Oh, gosh.
A very recent nerve, but I was just like, you seem like a lovely, lovely human being. And the nice thing about going to work with a resident is that because she's fresh out of med school, she hasn't been in the field long enough to become deeply depressed and burnt out and hate her life. So she was actually very pleasant to interact with, but I was just like, I can't handle any of this anymore. Stop.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a wild world out there, I think.
I know. And just think, so many people are having that exact same experience, and then they get on omeprazole or whatever it might be, and then they're like, I wonder why my bloating is getting worse.
Right.
Whoopsie
Yeah.
daisy.
Wild.
But anyway, I think that's all I've got as far as the prebiotic conversation.
Yeah.
Again, if you guys want more on this topic, go check out the polyphenol episode, because polyphenols are prebiotic-like substances. So all of those polyphenol-rich foods are going to feed and nourish your good bacteria to some degree or another, and that's another thing that you can pursue. But as far as like the prebiotic fibers, I think we covered all the supplements, but really if there's any takeaway from this conversation, it's please try to get prebiotics from food primarily, and try to get polyphenols from food. And then once you kind of cover that base, or at least make some progress there, then you might consider experimenting with one or more of the supplements that we mentioned today. But don't be the person who's like on a super strict low FODMAP diet, but that is like, I will take PHGG because that's going to help eradicate the SIBO. Like, I don't know if that's really the ticket, guys.
Right.
Yep. Okay. Well, as always, guys, thank you for tuning in for the IBS Freedom Podcast. If you like this, share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with your Facebook groups. We would deeply appreciate the help getting the word out. And we will see you next week in the probiotic episode, which I am very excited to talk about. And in the meantime, keep trying to eat as many yummy plant foods as humanly possible, and go give your vagus nerve some TLC, and we will see you in the next episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast.
Bye-bye. I'm still frozen.